All right, welcome. As Passover is coming, we're going to be focusing on Pesach. We're going to start with kind of the philosophy and why we do it and the meaning and the purpose, and then we'll get into some of the details. All right, here we go. Mm-hmm. All right, class 7 is Passover. And let's start with what it means spiritually or philosophically. Coming out of Egypt is not only a remembrance, it's also an opportunity for ourselves. And so the matzah, some say, represents humility, and bread represents arrogance. It's all puffy, right? And the opportunity is for self-growth, is to start over again, is to leave our own Egypt, right? So we're all trapped in our own Egypt. And the word Mitzrayim means constraints or straits. And our opportunity is to open ourselves up. Right? So as we approach Pesach and we get rid of our chametz, that's part of the meditation, part of the purpose, part of the kavanah, is to, as our Seder says, to envision ourselves as if we ourselves are coming out of Egypt. In order to do that, we can't really do that historically. Right? What we have to do is make it a contemporary exodus. We all have our habits. We're all locked in to our perspectives because we're human. And the opportunity here is to leave our own Egypt that we create for ourselves and open ourselves up. There's another one that's an inward exodus, but there's also an outward exodus. Although we are enjoying our freedom here in America, there are people all over the world who are still enslaved, that are still being, well, even here in America, there are still people that are being held down, held back, not included, excluded. And it's up to us to not only look at ourselves, but to look outward to see what we can do to help others become more free. Rabbi Michael Walzer says, wherever you are, it's probably Egypt. Right? We all have our own constraints. We all have our own imprisonment. And it's time for us to get more free. Number 2, there's a better place, a world more attractive, a promised land. Right? We all know that there's something that we can do. There's something ahead of us that we need to strive for. Number 3, the only way to this promised land is through the wilderness. You have to get up and go, right, into an unknown space. There's no way to get there except by joining together and marching, right? We have to put one foot in front of the other. We have to take incremental steps. The power of incremental steps is amazing. Think of something you can do today as we approach Pesach to take one small step toward the place you want to be. Figure out what your promised land is and take one step, right, toward that freedom. Our rabbis teach that the water didn't split until we got into it, right? We had to take human initiative before the water split, before miracles can happen, before growth can happen, before we break out of our own Egypt. It's up to us to take a small step forward. Marge Piercy wrote a beautiful poem, which is the courage to let go, the courage to let go of the things that we hold most precious that are holding us back, right? And not only does she write about that inner journey, but she writes about the people, the Jewish people who had the courage to leave, right? So we know in the tragic days of the Holocaust, there are those not that many, right? But there are those who saw the writing on the wall and decided to leave, right? To leave Poland, to leave Germany, to leave everything behind and seek shelter. How hard could you imagine to leave your house? So imagine that for a moment, the ability, the courage to leave your home when things go south. Right? That recognition should give us a little bit of inspiration to do what we need to do to become more free, to become more kind, to become more loving, to become more attentive. So I'll read some of her poem, Marge Piercy. The courage to let go of the door, the handle, the courage to shed the familiar walls whose very stains and leaks are comfortable as the little moles of the upper arm. Stains that recall a feast, a child's naughtiness, a loud battering storm that slapped the roof hard, pouring through. The courage to abandon the graves dug into the hill, the small bones of children and the brittle bones of the old whose marrow hunger had stolen. The courage to desert the tree planted and only begun to bear, the riverside where promises were shaped, the street where their empty pots were broken. The courage to leave the place whose language you learned as early as your own, whose customs, however dangerous or demeaning, bind you like a halter you have learned to pull inside, to move your load. The land fertile with the blood spilled on it, the roads mapped and annotated for survival. The courage to walk out of the pain that is known into the pain that cannot be imagined. Right? So we remember our ancestors who had the courage to leave, and we take that as inspiration for us to do our own small incremental steps. Right? Here we go. Pesach, according to the 2013 Pew study, down at the bottom, 11% of Jews attend synagogue each week. Right? In Christian circles, you are religious when you're a churchgoer, right? But in Judaism, that's not true. You're Jewish in many ways. You can express your Judaism in many ways. I pray that synagogues become more and more attractive and meaningful and engaging. But as of now, 11% of the Jews attend synagogue each week. 23% of Jews light Shabbat candles. Right? They have that ritual in the home on Friday night. 53% of Jews usually fast on Yom Kippur. Right? I imagine more, right? Well, for sure, more attend Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur services, but actually fast on Yom Kippur, 53% reported, right, that they fast on Yom Kippur. And the highest, right, percentage of Jews usually attend a Passover Seder. So it begs the question, right, and borrowing from the language of our Haggadah, why is this practice different from all other practices? What makes Pesach so attractive and meaningful that it survived 70% of the Jewish community from generation to generation to generation? One of the reasons, and we'll see in a moment, is that it has a wonderful and beautiful structure. It's experiential. We taste the bitter herbs, we taste the charoset, right? We drink the wine of freedom and celebration. Right? It's active, it's not passive, it's active, which is one of the keys for attending synagogue, right? We have to make it less passive and more active. But here at the Pesach Seder, right, there's a secret, there's some formula built into the Pesach Seder that people are attracted to, that people are willing to attend and celebrate. I think the other one is its universal message of freedom. Not only do we see the Pesach Seder as allowing us to be free, but we see it as expressing our values of freedom for all. Right? And so the highest attended ritual, synagogue service in all of Judaism is the Passover Seder. So let's learn a little bit about the timeline. What is the story, and how do we get to a place from slavery to freedom, which is what the Pesach Seder takes us through that journey. So here's the beginning. A new king arose over Egypt, one who did not remember Joseph. So let's remember how Joseph got to Egypt in the first place, right? His brothers, right? He was a show-off, a braggart in his younger years. His father favored him. Why did his father favor him? Because he was the firstborn to his beloved Rachel, right? So Joseph and Benjamin were the only two sons of his beloved wife, Rachel. We back up a little bit more, right? Lavan, the father-in-law, switched Leah and Rachel, right, when he was about to get married, because Leah was the firstborn. However, Jacob was really in love with Rachel. Rachel was his beloved. And so legend has it that Joseph looked a lot like Rachel. So Rachel died giving birth to Benjamin. And so he was mourning the loss of his beloved Rachel. And Joseph looked exactly like Rachel and reminded him of Rachel. And so he became the beloved son, the firstborn of his beloved wife. And he gave him a coat of many colors. And he told his brothers about the dreams that he was having, where everybody was bowing down to him. And they stuffed him in a pit and they were going to kill him. But Judah convinces the brothers, instead of killing him, to sell him down to Mitzrayim, to sell him down to Egypt. And so they sell him to a traveling band of Ishmaelites wandering, through the desert on their way to, traveling through the desert on the way to Egypt. And there he arrives in Egypt, poor and right. And so he works in the house of Potiphar. Potiphar's wife frames him, right, for not loving her. And he's in the dungeon. Story goes, right, he rose to power from the dungeon, interpreting dreams, finally interpreting Pharaoh's dream. And so he became second in command in all of Egypt, the financial advisor for the 7 years of famine, and then 7 years of plenty, leading into the 7 years of famine. And so his family moved down to Goshen, which is a suburb of Egypt, and lived there for many years, right, happy and content under the rule of the king. Then a new king arose over Egypt, one who didn't remember the whole Joseph story. And he just found some foreigners, some strange people among them. And that's how they became slaves. Ruthlessly, the Egyptians made life bitter for them with harsh labor, right? And so not only did they have to work with meager pay, just probably food and water, but they made life even more bitter for them. Right? Not only were they enslaved, but they were enslaved ruthlessly. Before Moses delivered Israel, Shiphrah and Puah delivered Moses. So in order to keep the Israelites down, right, they decided to kill all the firstborn sons. However, Shiphrah and Puah were two of the women who helped with the birthing. And it says that they feared God, right? And they just couldn't do it. And so they ended up hiding some of the babies, right? And among them was baby Moses, right? And the story goes that they put him in a basket, right? Well, they gave him to his mother. They put him in a basket. Finally, his mother and sister couldn't hide him no longer after 3 months. Guess he was getting louder and louder. And they're trying to keep him secret, and they just couldn't do it anymore. So they put him in a basket and hoped to God that he would be saved. And lo and behold, the king's daughter saved him from the river, right? And became his mother. And Moses grew up in the palace of the king. When Moses had grown up, he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen, and he struck down the Egyptian. Somehow he knew, felt intuitively his connection with the Israelites, and he had an ethical, moral sense, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen. He knew at this point that he was an Israelite, and he struck down the Egyptian, trying to save the Israelite on purpose, by accident. It happened. All right, so I'll see if I can do a new share. Here we go. Moses then is a renegade, and he leaves Egypt for fear of getting punished for killing an Egyptian. And off he goes to the desert. He works for a man called Jethro. He finds him in the desert, and Jethro is a holy man. And Jethro has this connection to mountains, and a specific mountain. And so let's see what happens.
Here I am. Take the sandals from your feet. For the place on which you stand is holy ground. Who are you? I am that I am. I don't understand. I am the God of your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
You were born of my mother from heaven. You are our brother.
What do you want with me? I have seen the oppression of my people in Egypt, and have heard their cry. Stop it! Leave my man alone! So I have come down to deliver them out of slavery, and bring them to a good land. A land flowing with milk and honey. And so unto Pharaoh I shall send you. Me? Who am I to lead these people? They'll never believe me. They won't even listen. I shall teach you what to say. Let my people go! But I was their enemy. I was the prince of Egypt, the son of the man who slaughtered their children. You've chosen the wrong messenger. How can I even speak to these people?
Who made man's mouth? Who made the deaf, the mute, the seeing, or the blind? Did not I? Now go!
king of Egypt. But Pharaoh will not listen. So I will stretch out my hand and smite Egypt with all my wonders. Take the staff in your hand, Moses. With it, you shall do my wonders. I shall be with you, Moses.
Be honest, do you really want to watch a video that looks like this?
Almost. Am I back? Yeah, am I back?
Yeah, I think
Oh,
so.
okay.
I think you are.
Okay, yeah, back to the slideshow. Wonderful. Yeah, so there you go. That's the most beautiful representation of what happened at the burning bush. So I think a couple things about it. Number one, the way that he got there was by chasing a sheep, a little sheep that was a lamb that escaped. And so he went down into the crags where he could find the sheep, and lo and behold, he met the burning bush. So what does that mean? Right? What's that represent? The Midrash, rabbinic imagination, tells us that he was a shepherd, right? He was working for Jethro, and he was a shepherd. A lot of our leaders were shepherds because, right, it's training for shepherding people. And so he was a shepherd out in the desert. And it turns out that one little lamb, this one little sheep, escaped the group and went off. Right? And the shepherd's job is to keep them all together. And so Moses had a choice to make. He could either stay with the herd of sheep, or he could chase the little sheep. And so he was deciding back and forth. On one hand, he's going to desert all the rest of the sheep. On the other hand, there's this little lamb that needs attention and saving. And so he decided to go after the lamb, to leave the sheep, doing their own thing. And he went out to chase them. And so that was the moment that God said, okay, Moses, you're the one for me, because you care about every single sheep in your flock, and you won't even let one go. And so that's when he saw the burning bush, the bush that was burning and not being consumed. A couple things about I was in Los Angeles in rabbinical school when this film was getting made. It's called The Prince of Egypt. Go see it if you haven't seen it. It's a beautiful representation of the Exodus. It uses a lot of rabbinic interpretation to fill out the story. And I was told that the voice of God was made up of multiple takes of Moses's voice. And so the voice of God was the voice of Moses amplified. And so I thought that's a beautiful production quality that he heard God's voice resonating inside of his soul. The question that we contend with is, what is the voice of God? Does God have a voice? Does God have vocal cords? One answer is, it's a calling, right? It's an intense calling. And so that's what the production quality represents, that it was the voice of Moses doubled and doubled again and doubled again. One other thing about the film is that there's a beautiful song by Whitney Houston. It's called "There Can Be Miracles." There can be miracles if you believe. It's one of the highlights of the film. It was rewritten by the rabbis at the UJ. They gave University of Judaism. They gave the script over to some rabbis for rabbinic consulting, and the original was he can do miracles. He can do miracles if you believe, right? Meaning that God performs miracles directly for those who believe. And they changed it to contemporize the issue. He said, there can be miracles if you believe, meaning it's not necessarily by the hand of God. It's more of a collective, action that causes the miracles. That was interesting too. Hey, so here we go. Sometimes our responsibilities choose us, right? And we feel compelled and called. Let my people go, right? So Moses goes finally, after much of a fight at the burning bush. It sort of shortens the conversation between Moses and God. It was a long conversation. Moses kept saying, you got the wrong guy, I'm hard of speech, it won't work. So he said, I'll tell you what, I'll get your brother Aaron and the two of you are going to go. And they went down and they said, let my people go. And Pharaoh said no. After each of the 10 plagues, God hardened Pharaoh's heart, right? And some people say, that's not fair, right? Moses and Aaron asked to let my people go. And the assumption is maybe he would have, but then God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And my interpretation is much the same as there can be miracles. It's not that God actively hardened Pharaoh's heart, but rather after saying no once, twice, 3 times, he just couldn't turn back. He wasn't able to turn back, right? And so God hardening Pharaoh's heart means God set up the human consciousness such that once you're in a habit, right? Once you do it once, twice, 3 times, then you just can't turn back, right? It would take a miracle, right? To leave your habits and change your opinion and change your perspective so dramatically once you've done it once, twice, 3 times, right? And then finally, it's time for the death of the firstborn, which is horrible and gruesome. When I see the blood on your houses, right? So we were told to put some blood on our doorposts. I will pass over you so that no plague will destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. The doorpost is a very special and holy place. Even now, we put a mezuzah, Torah scroll, a mini Torah scroll up on our doorposts, because that's the place of Exodus, right? That's the place where you are in one room and you open the door, so you can hear the metaphor, and you walk out into the wilderness, into a space unknown, into a different space, right? And that's what God wanted the Israelites to do. They were stuck in Egypt, right? And God needed them to pass through the doorway into the wilderness, into a different space. Right? That's one way that we can see ourselves as if we came out of Egypt, is to see the doorway and start walking and walk through the doorway just as our ancestors did. The Egyptians urged the people on, so the people took their dough before it was leavened, right? And tradition is that we left Egypt so quickly that we couldn't even let the dough rise, right? So there were dough rising everywhere, making bread for the trip, and then get out, hurry up, here they come, right? We didn't have time for the dough to rise, and so that's how we have matzah, and we commemorate the leaving of Egypt with matzah. The Israelites journeyed about 600,000 men on foot, aside from the children and the women, and a mixed multitude went up with them. So if there are 600,000 men, that means there are, I don't know, about the same amount of women, and add on the children. That's a whole lot of people. Yeah, I'm no mathematician, but that's well over 1 million. Went through the desert. And not only that, but a mixed multitude, some other slaves, and possibly some Egyptians who are being oppressed, by the higher ups, by the nobility, and a mixed multitude went up with them. It wasn't only the Israelites, it was anyone who was unhappy in Egypt went with them. Archaeologists question the amount of people that journeyed through the desert. They say, if that actually happened, then there would be some remnants, some archaeological proof that it happened. So it's not there, and it's hard to prove something by omission, right? But there's some doubt about the historicity of the Exodus. We believe that some people, right, a group of people left Egypt, perhaps joined some other people who were nomadic tribes who were in the wilderness, and together they conquered the land of Israel. Here we go. So you heard about chametz, chametz and matzah, right? So chametz is the name for the stuff that we're not supposed to eat on Pesach, foods made from wheat, barley, oats, spelt, or rye, grains, right, which can leaven. Right? So anything that can leaven, we don't eat. Foods prohibited to own, eat, or benefit from on Passover. So not only do we not eat chametz, we are prohibited to own it or eat it or benefit at all from it on Passover. So it's a very serious prohibition. It has a wide range of implications. Right? And so the idea is that we start winding down our boxes of cereal and our pasta, and we don't replace it sort of till after Passover. There are some food items, chametz, that we can't throw away because of financial reasons, right? There are food that just wouldn't make sense to throw in the garbage once we hit Passover. And so there's a long-standing tradition that you can sell your chametz, right, over Passover to someone who's not Jewish. And the Rabbinical Assembly does that for us. I used to do it myself, but now we can rely on the conservative movement, the Rabbinical Assembly, who does it online. And so it's sort of a loophole, but a way that we can live within the law. So we just cover up our chametz and we can sell it away. An interesting extension of the law is called kitniot, which are legumes and other grains prohibited by some on Passover, things like rice and soy and lentils, which don't leaven, but are still considered chametz, an extension of chametz. Why did it happen? I think the same reason why chicken is considered meat, which is that back in the day in the shuk, in the marketplace, it was hard to tell the difference between meat and chicken. In this case, it was hard to tell the difference between what's chametz, between the leavened wheat and the legumes and the grains, right? And so they're probably packaged in the same sort of packaging and sacks, right? And so the Ashkenazi community decided to extend the law to anything that looks like chametz in the marketplace also. And the Sephardim never did that, right? The Sephardic Jews never extended that law. Maybe it was more clear in the places where the Sephardim lived, or is just the Ashkenazi Jews who are a little bit over anxious about chametz. Nowadays, there's a debate in the conservative movement whether we should still continue on with the tradition now that things are well marked. So some do and some don't these days. I don't do it because I grew up in a traditional family and I have a traditional family, and so I still don't eat keep me out, but many do. It makes Passover a little more palatable. Spiritual spring cleaning, right? So we get rid of our chametz. Some people actually use it as an actual spring cleaning because it's the spring. But there's metaphors that we can use. Right? When we remove the chametz, we also remove all that extra stuff that we carry, all that baggage that we don't need anymore, all that stuff that we hoard a little bit. Right? It's time to get rid of all that stuff and become more free. But let's talk about the chametz in particular. Remove all the chametz items from your house. Right? Eat down your chametz without replacing it a few weeks before Passover. Now, thoroughly clean all the surfaces, counters, tables, ovens that often touch chametz. Right? Do a nice spring cleaning in your kitchen. Right? It doesn't have to be all over the house. It can just be in the places where chametz can usually be found. 2 pro tips, how to kosher. All right, so next one, step number 3 is koshering pots and pans and utensils and serving dishes. That's the most advanced practice that we have. And there are different ways to kosher items. And depending on what they are, consult your local rabbi if you're interested in koshering the dishes. Many traditional Jews have a different set of dishes so that they can just pull out the Pesach dishes without doing the koshering spiritual cleansing. Pro tip number 2, there you go. Instead of koshering, some Jews sub out their typical dishes and cooking utensils for a special Passover set. And so that's what we do in our house. Okay, here we go. The Passover Seder. Let's get down to some of the technical stuff that we do. So we sit down at the Passover Seder. You can see the beautiful Pesach plate in front of you. We'll talk about what's on it. But I think what's nice here is the beauty of the Seder table. That's what we're after. We're after a beautiful experience. You don't have to cook, gourmet food, but right, some traditional foods and make it beautiful and special. And why do we do it? And you shall explain v'higadata, which is the source word for Haggadah, to your child on that day. It is because of what God did for me in Egypt when I went free from Egypt. Right? You tell the story. V'higadata levincha. The implication is we don't just read the Haggadah, we don't just read the Pesach books, but rather we have to teach them. Right? And so if you have, especially if you have kids around the table, make sure that you're engaging them, right? With, you can prepare trivia games. There are plays that they can conduct, right? All kinds of dress up, all right? And all kinds of ways that you can make the Passover experience special and engaging, especially for the kids. If you're an adult Seder, make sure to prepare, there are lots of Haggadot out there. Also, you can search online just for some engaging conversational material. The point is to engage in the Haggadah rather than just read it. Right? So here you go. You have your Seder, which means order. And I think that's one of the reasons it's so popular is because it's orderly, right? And we need order in our lives. That's part of the reason it works. And the people who created order and intellectual conversation were the Greco-Roman symposiums that we lived with, right? We lived under Greek and Roman rule for a long time, and we accepted and integrated some of their culture, right? So there are some not good stuff that we acculturated and integrated, and then there's some beautiful stuff that we took. Right, the not so good stuff was the Olympiada and the bathhouses and sort of the things that make Rome Rome. But here's a beautiful one, which is they used to have symposium. They're very intellectual, educated people and loved intellectual conversation. You can imagine, right, sitting around with Roman columns all around, laying down on their couches, eating grapes, right, and having conversations and drinking wine and discussing math, science, philosophy, It all came out of this Greco-Roman Empire. And so the Seder is based on that, right? We have the same wine, we have the same reclining on the couches, right? And we have, questions, right? And that's probably how the Greco-Roman symposium happened, right? They lay out some questions and then they discuss. The Seder takes place on the first and second nights of Passover. That's in the diaspora. And in Israel, they only have one Seder, which is, I think, a much better approach, right? Because it gives it all that importance and urgency to get it, have that impact on the first Seder. In the diaspora, we have two Seders, we do two different things, right? And have two different experiences. The Haggadah is the telling, right? And there are at least 3,000 versions, right? Find the Haggadah that works for you and your guests. Kadesh is we bless the wine. So here's the order. You can find it online. You can find it in any Haggadah. It's the first thing that we read to tell everybody that we have an order here, right? We can organize our thoughts. We know what the beginning, middle, and end is. And then after the meal, we have find the Afikomen, say the Birkat HaMazon, our grace after meals, sing songs of praise, right? And some of them are really good. The right, Chad Gadya is a beautiful one, and Echad Miyodeh, who knows one. And there are some really fun, even silly songs. And then we come to the conclusion of the Seder. There's your Seder plate, roasted egg, haroset, shankbone, karpas, chazeret, maror, and a salt dish of water. Let's see what they're all about. Kadesh is the blessings over the wine. 4 cups of wine. A lot of people use, Mogen David or Kedem Malaga. Use a nice wine. And go out and buy some nice white wine, some nice red wine, and enjoy the 4 cups of wine. Each one represents a different language of going out in the Torah. So I will save you, I will bring you, I will take you out. There are 4 times that it says that in our Pesach paragraph in the Torah, each representing one form of God taking us out of Egypt. There we go. I will bring you out, I will rescue you, I will redeem you, I will take you as my own. And historically, probably related to the 4 sections of the Greco-Roman Symposium, but we've incorporated a different reason, which is the 4 sayings of freedom in the Torah. We dip our vegetable in salt water. We say the blessing, right? The salt water, of course, represents the tears of the Israelites as they were under such oppression. Magid, the story of liberation, begins. This is the poor man's bread that our ancestors in the land of Egypt ate. That all who are hungry come and eat. Right? So it's this right invitation. Right, and it's usually not a serious invitation, but back in the day, it probably was. So we start off in hunger and in slavery, and we end in redemption, a fully redeemed land of Israel. This year we are slaves. Next year, may we all be free. The Magid, the story of liberation, starts with the 4 questions, right, and meant to engage everybody around the table, traditionally recited by the youngest person at the table. And on why is this night different from all other nights? What's so special about this night? And then we go on and answer the questions. The story of liberation. Once we were slaves and now we're free. Right? As you can tell, that's the whole story. Once we were slaves and now we're free. And we give praise to God, and we give praise, right, to our community for having the courage to come out of Egypt. And it says here, even the wisest among us are still obligated to tell the story every year. And it's not necessarily about reminding ourselves. It's about the telling of the story, which is probably why it's so popular. Right? Everybody has to tell the story and retell the story. Once we were slaves and God took us out of Egypt. In every generation, says the Haggadah, a person is obligated to see themselves as if they personally left Egypt, which is very difficult to do. We talked a little bit about that at the beginning, but here's the obligation. not only to see and tell the story historically, but to make it true for ourselves. Right? And all the Seder rituals are meant for us to feel the pain, to taste the tears, right? And to eat the maror, the bitter herbs, right? And finally to drink the cups of wine, which express our freedom. Right? Here's Magid. We tell the story. All right, and there are three things that we have to focus on. Otherwise, we haven't fulfilled the mitzvah of the Seder. And here they are, Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. Pesach refers to the shank bone, which represents the sacrifice that we used to offer back in the temple days. That was a big deal back in the day, the Paschal lamb, the Passover offering. And then we used to eat it, right? Remember, right? It's like a holy barbecue because God passed over our homes in Egypt. Pesach means to pasach, which means to pass over. Why do we call it Passover? Because during the night of the killing of the firstborn, God passed over our homes, and we were saved. Matzah, because we didn't have time for our bread to rise before we left Egypt. Right? That's the flat matzah, and reminds us of our hurry and our anxiety and our panic to leave Egypt. It requires that kind of urgency. It requires that kind of transformation and urgency in order for us to get out of Egypt, out of our own Egypt. Maror is the bitter herbs because the Egyptians made our lives bitter in slavery. So when we eat those bitter herbs, it really transports us to that place of slavery. Finally, we have the afikomen. And the afikomen is right, a game. First of all, it's an obligation for after the meal, then you're supposed to eat the afikomen. I think it's in memory and commemoration of the Paschal lamb, which was also eaten with matzah and maror. And finally, right, was added an extra piece of matzah, afikomen. Right, afikomen is not a Hebrew word. Right, it comes from probably the Roman, Greek, and so it's based on dessert, right? Something that we no longer have in our tradition, kind of matzah dessert, but that's the obligation. And the fun thing is to hide the afikomen. That's what engages the children. You play a game of, hide the matzah, and the children are supposed to run around the house. And once they find it, our tradition in our home is that the children bargain with the parents for the parents to get the afikomen back so they can continue the Seder. And so let the bargaining begin after they find the afikomen. Finally, the conclusion of the Seder has us welcoming Elijah, Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, into our Passover Seder. So we literally get up and we open the door and we invite Elijah the prophet in. And why do we do it? One reason is he challenged injustice and overthrew the worship of idols, right? He created he supported our monotheism, and he challenged injustice, right? One God means that right, we have this, we are compelled, right, to do justice in the world. Because God is just, so too must we be just. Right? And another reason we welcome Elijah the prophet is because Elijah comes around at these transitional moments in our lives, or the liminal moments in our lives. When we're passing through a door, it's a scary situation, a frightening situation. And Elijah the prophet comes to ease our anxiety. In the Nevi'im, in the prophets, we read that Elijah never died. He was brought up to heaven in a chariot of fire. And so we still believe that he's still around in some way. The spirit of Eliyahu is still alive and well. And there are a lot of rabbinic stories of rabbis and people running into Eliyahu Hanavi, sort of masked in a body. So he sometimes inhabits bodies and bringing peace and comfort to the world and wisdom. And so the same thing happens at the Passover Seder. We welcome the spirit of Elijah the prophet and sing Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. So we can mean it literally, right? And so for people who make Aliyah, who immigrate to Israel, requires a lot of energy and a lot of urgency. Right? And so that's one way that we can understand it, is to actually, literally, physically get to Jerusalem next year. The other way to look at it is more metaphorically, right, which is the promised land, which means more peace, more justice, more loving kindness in the world. Next year will be better, right? Next year, we're going to be in a better place because of the doorways that we pass through on Passover. All right, so that's our Passover lesson. So I'll stop the recording. Thank you for joining us on the recording. See you soon.